Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Insights, the podcast that focuses everything temperature control logistics for the pharmaceutical industry. My name's Thomas Hunt, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Fabian Reitmeier, who's the project manager, logistics integrity at Teva Pharmaceuticals. Fabian, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for the invite, first of all. It's a great opportunity to be here.
It's great to have you on. So just to kick things off, it would be a really nice place to start was if you could just run us through maybe your career so far up until your current role at Teva and your current responsibilities, please.
Yeah. So I'm with Teva Global Logistics for 7.5 years roughly now. So what I'm doing is I'm driving continuous improvement projects or initiatives in the area of what we call pivot to growth compliance. Encourage everyone to read just after our earnings call a couple of weeks back from our CEO, Richard Francis. We published, again, nice articles around it about pivot to growth, what is it all about, because it would take an hour for me to talk about it. But like that, we build a kind of an area for me, which is called pivot to growth compliance, because our portfolio is shifting more into biologics, biosimilar segment. That means complex logistics, 2 to 8 shipments. Apart from that, I'm also owning the packaging work streams, right? So staying in contact with all the suppliers, owning these connections, but also being kind of trying to be ahead of the curve of new product introductions, innovations, those kind of things. And prior to Teva, I was working for UPS Supply Chain Solutions. So you can see the strong logistics background. Back then, I had some customers not in the pharmaceutical industry, and now I switched to the pharma logistics. I'm doing that now for more than 7 years.
Nice. Great. Okay, good. I wanted to sort of rewind and start a little bit further back around 2020 and COVID, because you joined Teva when the pandemic hit, I understand. And I was quite interested to understand what were those first few months like and how did you prioritize the supply chains at that point?
Well, I need to correct it a bit. So I joined September 18, right? It was roughly a year or a year and a half earlier than that, which was good. So not immediately into the chaos. But yeah, so what I mean, key for us and for all pharmaceutical industries and producers is like to delivering to our patients, right? We had, we were not lucky, I would say, because we took earlier this decision to have strategic partnerships with some carriers, not only via our LSPs, our main LSPs we work with, but also directly with carriers. And therefore we were in a good position to especially deliver to our key markets. And I must say, after a bit of rough start into that, we were really able to deliver everything as promised on time because of these strategic partnerships we had. More the issue was then on the, I would say, API side. So for the supply chain, of course, we talk a lot about finished products from manufacturing side to the market. That's also where I'm working in. But of course, we also need the API at our manufacturing sites to being able to produce our finished products. And that's more the issue I think everyone knows, especially from the APAC region, where they were very strict in terms of shutdowns or lockdowns back then. And that was a major issue, not only to get finished products into those markets, but also actually getting APIs out. So, but based on our partnerships, we are really in a good position to still deliver, although it was a bit.
You had a plan for a scenario like that already in place that you could follow, or did you have a bit of foresight going into the pandemic, what might happen, and you got slightly ahead of the curve?
We got ahead of the curve, I would say, because who could plan for COVID, for a pandemic to hit? I mean, everyone kind of has it. I read it when I was there, then I read like business continuity plans, and there was always like this one bullet point said pandemic. I said, okay, how often does that happen? Like before 2020, I think statistically 150 years or so, we have a pandemic. So once in a lifetime for us, I hope it's the first and last experience we had, but it's not really like something you plan. Oh, what do we do when pandemics hits? It's more like also geopolitical issues. It's those kind of business continuity plans, how you react. And that's why I think we got really ahead of the curve with those partnerships we had.
Yeah. And looking back at though, from those partnerships, which ones were most critical in those first sort of 3 to 4 months?
We still have with one carrier, a strategic partnership, delivering especially into the US market from Europe. And they were able to support and still operate when the pandemic hit, because of course, first of all, a lot of passenger aircraft flights have been canceled, right? Cargo flights then maybe later as well, because then the carriers didn't want to put their staff into regions and they couldn't enter US maybe or other countries as well. So it was a strict lockdown there. But this was one major thing, and it didn't only help in the pandemic. Also now with the conflicts in the Middle East, where we had some airport, or not airport closures, but a lot of carriers then stopped operations, especially into Israel when that conflict became worse the last years. And there we had like one carrier which is always operating, and which was actually amazing and put us in a very good position there.
Yeah, nice. Okay. And what were the changes in process or mindset that came out of that? Or were there any changes in process mindset that from the learnings of COVID that you're still playing out today or have been implemented in the teams?
You always need a backup plan, right? I think that's key. What we learned, apart from these very theoretical business continuity plans you always have. I mean, everyone probably has that. We have that as well, but we never needed to use it. So that was really the first time to have it. But if you ask me and to the teams, it's more a mindset thing to really be aware things can change tomorrow, and we need to change the ways of working. So, and I think that's actually a cultural thing, which is excellent in our team, where we work very quick to being able to adapt to this and to just say, okay, it worked for the last 10 years. Now we need to change. What are we going to do? Where are we going to prioritize? So huge creativity in the team, right? But an open mindset to also being able to have such a change. So you need just the right people and right partners there, and then you can manage those changes.
Yeah. And I suppose it's nice to have those plans in place on paper,
exactly.
But actually to be able to test it in real life and then see where it really stood up and where it didn't is a great test. So yeah,
exactly.
We've spoken before together around sort of air to ocean. I wanted to talk to that because I know it's something you've been involved with the last couple of years at Teva, and at Logipharma you're chairing a panel on the air to ocean shift, I think. And what's the core message that you're looking to get across to the audience during that session? The key takeaways.
Well, first of all, we had a blast there, right on the stage. So it was really great to being able to present this, because I think for the other, and the room was full, by the way, right? We didn't have to make the big stage, to be honest, right? It was just it was a masterclass, but the room was really full and really packed, because I think the other pharma companies were very interested in this switch from air to ocean, because we at Teva, it's not a secret, we are at more than 90% ocean. So we are very far there already. Other pharma companies are more starting there. They still look at, okay, the TCO concept, total cost of ownership, which products we really ship ocean, and others are more relevant from monetary aspect to ship air, because we can sell them faster. But in general, what we wanted to deliver as a message is taking all these facts into consideration. You can easily with the right partners, even the most difficult lanes you can switch and can be qualified, because I could talk about this for an hour as well, but what we did there was like a complete qualification for a biologic product. So a lot of regulatory aspects as well played into this, and it was a bit of trial and error in the beginning. What kind of packaging do we use? Are we needing that? Because, hey, we have experience in air freight active. You don't need blankets, additional packaging material, because it's an active container. What should happen? And then you switch to ocean. It's an active reefer. What should happen? So that's like the logic you think about, right? But then you realize in reality, this is much more complex than shipping air, is much more complex than shipping on ocean. So I just wanted to come back to your question. It's a bit, if you want to qualify that and you have the right partners in place, even the most difficult lanes can be qualified.
Yeah. And is there a reason that Teva's been, let's say, really successful at going over to ocean and others haven't moved so much across? Is it something in the medicines that you ship in terms of their stability or non-stability, or the routes or customers you supply, or is it just because you focus on it, do you think?
I even say that's based on the products, or that we have not so complex products as other pharma companies. I would even say biologics is the most complex and critical in terms of temperature excursions, especially low excursions. So you cannot really risk. They might have stability above 8 degrees to a certain aspect, but below 2 is very critical, right? So in general, to be very fair, it's also cost driven in the beginning, right? Say, okay, to air freight from Europe to US or Australia, especially down there, it's really expensive. And the volumes are growing. We have more and more volumes, which is essentially good, right? Because the demand is there. But okay, then also the cost side, we need to look at that. And we have a long-term plan in terms of inventory. So were able to switch to ocean also on very long distances. And so we looked at it from a financial aspect and say, okay, it's definitely from a financial and sustainability aspect worth looking at it. So let's try to qualify it. So we did several runs, but it took like, I think for the first real qualification, took us in total 1.5 to 2 years. Actually being able to fully qualify it and then do the switch.
Right. Okay. And in your experience then, because obviously you had a lot of experience in doing the switch, what are sort of the top 2, 3, 4 challenges that typically you face when going from air to ocean?
Yeah, first of all, it's a bit what I said already. It's like you should not compare active air freight with active ocean freight, because that's like what I've seen a bit also talking on Logipharma to other pharma companies, right? To industry peers saying who might want to do the switch now is more if I ship air active, for me personally, it's very secure. And if I switch to ocean route, I need to take into consideration that very long time you need to monitor these shipments, because if we talk for our example to Australia, we do not talk about maybe 1 or 2 weeks lead time, but like 3 months, because the ocean vessel just taking 50 something days to Sydney from Rotterdam port if you take just this route. And with that one, you have always these loading and offloading operations, right? Where you do not have power. So the reefers do not have a battery, or at least not all. I mean, they're changing there as well a bit in the industry, but in the majority of those reefers, they do not have a battery. So if it's plugged out, it's plugged out. It's no longer working. So okay, what is happening if you ship from northern to southern hemisphere? You really need to look at the climate conditions you're shipping to. You really need to focus on that, because in air you do not care basically, right? You ship active. It doesn't matter if you ship to Australia, Brazil, US, or to Norway. It doesn't matter, because it's active, very controlled. The plug off times are limited, and if they have a battery, so they will still maintain the temperature. In ocean, that's not the case. So whenever it's plugged out and you have outside. Here, maybe in Germany or in the UK, currently it's maybe perfect conditions. You have 7 degrees. Oh, but then we go now in February to Sydney, it might be 35. We need to look at those parameters and then say, okay, can I ship just as is without blankets, for example, or do we need additional protection material? And so really, what I would say is you need to picture the whole journey, also in terms of the time I described for the long journey you have. And then, of course, if you have this experience, and now we have this experience, we can assess it very quickly what kind of packaging or protection material we need on which lanes. So it's very easy for us now, but it was trial and error in the beginning, and a lot of learnings for us in this whole journey as well.
Yeah, and just in your experience, that the power off periods or the unplug you're describing a reefer, what typical time period do you need to sort of allow for? And do you have any insight into what temperature the inside of those reefers get to?
Yes, of course. So we had I know that's not we directly, but of course 3PLs, they usually have SLAs with the port operations, right? And there's outlined what kind of power off is typical. Usually it's between 3 to 4 hours, which is a typical, I would say, industry standard. But then you need to look at the ports specifically and assess those, because saying 3 to 4 hours might be written, but it's not reality. So some ports are better or faster. Well, I wouldn't say better, but they're faster because maybe they're also smaller. But others are very huge ports where you can have also 6 hours, 7 hours of plug-off time. And we've seen even 12 hours in some instances. And then if you, to come back to the second question then, what is the temperature inside the container? Or if you have outside like more than 30 degrees, it can go up to 20 degrees inside if you have a longer plug-off time. Or between 15 to 20 we saw. And then to keep still the products at 2 to 8, it's a challenge, and you will never get there without additional protection. Otherwise, you run into major temperature excursions, which might be then the need even to destroy products, which you don't want.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting. We worked with a client who was shipping into LA, and they were on one side of the port, I think it was Long Beach, had a typical loading period of about 4 to 5 hours, but the other side of the port had 12. Was much more of a regular basis. Even into the same port, you can get variances in terms of the unplug period. And I don't quite know of areas like sort of South America or Asia, where there's some sort of even longer times there. So it's an interesting area that I'm still learning on as well.
We actually also changed ports because of that, because of all the learnings to see, in that port is North America, it's also very different. If you go to US, if you go to New York port or Chester, which is close by kind of, if you look onto a map, but the port operations is really different, right? And therefore, it's just much more secure to switch. That's also something we will look at regularly, we need to make a switch there.
Yeah, good. Okay. And if we just move on to sort of temperature control itself and that topic, I want to understand what's the most common cause of temperature excursions you still see, or that's maybe the top 2 or 3 that you're still seeing on a regular basis?
Top 2, I would say insufficient packaging when you only look at the product, but if you look at the operations, like it's definitely still human errors. That means, okay, then you need to connect it somehow between additional packaging you require. Because of human errors, we had cases like just a shipping, an SLI was wrong, which stated 20 degrees, but it was a 2 to 8 shipment. So they changed the set point to 20 in the port, said, I'm doing a good job here, I'm doing it right, I'm changing it to 20, it's at 5. It was not really correct, right? So these kind of things happen, and you cannot avoid this, right? You can kind of be proactive on it if you have real-time devices, for example, able to see that. You're using smart reefer technology where your LSPs are able to react and to see it if you're using a hypercare service, for example, or via your own data loggers, which could be real time, as long as they have connection to cellular network, which is also not in every port the case. You could spot something like this, right? So there are solutions you could implement in order to prevent that and flag it as hey, it's 20 degrees, it's not right, please change it again. But those cases, because you need to prepare for those as well, because it will always happen.
No, I mean, the amount of people we've spoken to around human error is typically the major flaw. But you mentioned packaging there as well. And is there a typical reason that packaging goes wrong? Have you seen a sort of flaw or weak spot in packaging where you can get excursions you weren't expecting?
It's more like that you rely on maybe simple packaging in 228. We just say, okay, I put a simple thermal blanket on it. It will be good, right? But then what I typically see is then using the wrong packaging. That means mostly you have the simple thermal blankets are more to absorb sun radiation, right, on tarmac time. And for me personally, that's more than for 1525, but not for cold chain. But then a lot of companies using those to actually win a bit of time also in 228, which is tough because those blankets are also not designed for that purpose, right? To be fair, with the suppliers as well. So not designed for that purpose, but still are being used. And they need to be smart because I know they are cheap and they might work for little spikes, but to really have a high assurance in terms of the security and integrity of your products, you might just need to dig a little bit deeper, invest maybe 10, 20 euros or dollars more, and then you're already there. So it's not like a rocket science, and you don't need like the passive packaging inside a reefer, not what we talk about, right? But to being able to select the right packaging for that specific lane, right? And to manage their cost and compliance, I think is key.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that if you talk about thermal covers, obviously, which is our area, 7 or 8 years ago, potentially there was a very large claims on what covers could do. But I feel that a lot of customers and people in your position have now caught up in terms of technically what these products can do and where their limitations start and stop. And when you have a data logger directly underneath a thermal blanket that's just using reflection, obviously the performance is minimal on everyone's covers. So it just needs to be used in the right place in the supply chain. But I think you're right. The sort of for 2 to 8 shipments, it's a difficult challenge to use that product there. 15 to 25, it's better, and it's good when you've got good tolerance on products, etc. That's where maybe it has a bit more of a place on certain lanes. So it's an education piece, I think, from the manufacturer, and then learning, isn't it, from everyone using the product over a longer period of time and seeing the data and understanding it better.
Yeah, you need to know what to use where, right? And that's just based on experience. That's I think where we are, as we are doing this ocean for a long time already, and a good position being able to say, we need this here, packaging A here, packaging B more there. So those kind of things. But
how do you choose then between packaging? If you're looking at a lane, what method do you use to look at sort of passive packaging, active temperature control containers, everything that you've talked about? What's the process you follow to validate those?
So to validate those, of course, we first of all look at the PQ, OQ documents from the supplier, being able to also assess, okay, what is this designed for, how long it could, what is the time until temperature excursion for a specific scenario. But usually what suppliers do, and you maybe know that even better than I do, is then they go on ISTA 7D, those kind of profiles, right, to qualify packagings. Our quality, and I'm not quality, by the way, right? Just to highlight that for everyone listening. Our quality is then more looking at real life examples, which is also tough, because then you say, okay, I actually ship it and try it myself. Okay, well, I have one example. It might be a perfect example and will not work next time. So maybe we come later to talk a bit about innovations and what's new and what could be improved. But usually we do those two first assessments with the existing qualification data to see, okay, that might work, but when it comes to 228 and to a real qualification, it's not even enough. We actually need to test it ourselves in a full qualification setup.
Yeah, and I think that from my experience, the qualification of a product inside a reefer, inside a warehouse or lorry using, say, a climate chamber or software simulation, we've got very good at that because it matches the real world situation quite nicely, and it's a very close match. And then if you then model the pack out or the vaccine or medicine, etc., and the load in the pallet, you can get a really, really accurate result. And we're very confident on that. I think the industry doesn't talk probably enough about the challenges of qualifying a product on the tarmac against direct sunlight. And obviously a climate chamber cannot do that. Yeah, and it's a completely different challenge when you're dealing with direct sunlight versus infrared inside. And I think there is definitely an area of sort of a challenge for everyone to get a proper qualification on a tarmac exposure before farmers start running lanes on everyone's products. I think that's still something that everyone's probably wrestling with, and you have to, you're right, dive in a little bit and do some live testing yourself at some point to get accurate results. But it's hard, yeah.
Yeah, and if I may add, I mean, if you to set up a whole qualification is like complex, right? Because you don't want to risk commercial products. You maybe want to produce extra like water-filled nebules, something like this, to actually test it. Depends on the product you're using, and then create a full qualification setup on how this is designed. It comes close to the real product, to ship it maybe to the destination, ship it back, ship it again, etc. So you have a little bit of experience, but still then you have 3, 4, 5 shipments, 6, something like this. Some during summer, some during winter. You need to wait a long time. So that's why simulations is like, it's brilliant. You can simulate all of that, right? Worst conditions, thousands of shipments in seconds, basically, through all the different climate zones, etc. So I think that's future.
Yeah. Okay, good. And we talked a little bit earlier, or you mentioned geopolitical instability, and obviously the more people we talk to on here, that it's coming up as more of an issue for everyone. How does that rise in geopolitical risk change the way you plan global routes today versus maybe 5, 6 years ago, or what changes have you had to make?
I mean, it's then what I said in the beginning, like what I started with, more than important than ever to have those strategic partnerships you can rely on, right? And not switching here because of costs and low costs there, and next week I ship with another LSP, etc. But of course, to be honest, so looking at developments in US, currently you probably never know exactly what's the next one, what will happen. And secondly, it's also about to be maybe less dependent. If you start from API manufacturing, less dependent from abroad, delivery from abroad, more have it closer to manufacturing sites, being able to produce your finished goods, and then to being able to ship it to the markets, to have plans for maybe adjusted stock levels as well. So we can see as well for certain products, right, that stock levels just change to being able to meet the demand, even though you have those waves, I would call it, whatever it is, taxes, or which was a big one, right, in the import taxes in the last months, to be able to still meet demand and then to adjust the supply chain based on that. If you need to adjust, for example, a route, if we take US, for example, I don't want to just focus on US, but it is a good example these days, right? So if you want to deliver directly into Chester or New York Port, if you go to East Coast, or you deliver maybe more south or more north via Canada, which takes longer, lead time is longer, but you're able to change. So you need to prepare to also have those lanes qualified already, being able to have a switch. But then you need to talk with the markets, with commercial units to say, okay, and what does that mean in terms of meeting our demand and have the right inventory and stock levels in our markets? So that's what's currently as well happening based on what's happened in the past with COVID, with other factors or instabilities in certain areas around the world.
Yeah. And when you're looking at, say, in this sort of situation, when you're looking at partnerships, and you mentioned how important that is in these tough situations, what are the key things you need to see in a partner that really make them able to deliver? Is it sort of infrastructure, or are there other things? As I say, is it cold storage, or I don't know, a global footprint that you have to see in order to cover what you're describing?
Well, not necessarily needs to be a global footprint. Could also be smaller players here, right? Don't need to be the big ones. I mean, we just need to being able to rely on them. They need to have definitely the right infrastructure. I think we talk later maybe about cold chain corridors, which is coming up more because more and more cold chain is on the roads, in the air, on the ocean, anyhow. And then but in terms of being able to rely on them, you also as a customer need to give something to them, which is then okay. Also now when it's like business as usual, we trust you to deliver it. We give you the business, we give you the volume, etc. So you benefit from it as well. And then when things get worse, they will prioritize us, of course, because we work with them for years with the right volumes. It's not a one-sided relationship. So, but it's basically interested in both sides to have this business up and running. I think that's one key thing. But of course, the compliance is for me what I look always at, right? Is key, needs to make sense, needs to be a good ratio, and therefore we need the experience from those carriers or LSPs or whoever it is, but also the infrastructure, in that field.
Yeah, the infrastructure, yeah. I think we're sort of moving on to infrastructure and the challenges on it. I mean, more and more pharma are looking to be shipped by temperature control, it seems, every year. And I was interested to understand what challenges does that put on the infrastructure in your experience, and where do we need additional infrastructure, and where does the support and investment need to go, do you feel, to keep up?
I personally feel that it's not brand new, but it's kind of more looking into is costs, but also still want to keep supply via air freight, and that means cold chain corridors are needed, because then I do not need to rely on the availability of active air freight containers, and maybe I don't want to use them because they're very expensive, right, to use. Also the service behind that with the airlines is quite expensive, handling and so on. So basically what we want to look at more is, do we have more stations in Europe if we talk about as a company delivering from Europe into US mainly, but also around the globe, but main is US. Then it's not enough like to have like one partner with one real cold chain corridor. We need to qualify that also without the usage then of active containers. That's very important to have all options, right? But I think the investment needs to be, of course, then from, is it the carrier, is it the airports, or is it the LSPs, to create these services, because the volume is there, the demand is there, but that's quite of a challenge. So I think there we need to have a little bit more options. And of course, what I see, what the carriers in ocean are doing is a lot going into the smart reefer direction, right? They're building up their stock there, which is good because it increases visibility and integrity then necessarily as well for all the pharma customers. So that's a good one. But I think they're in a good position already. So they're getting there very fast over the last years. But for us at the real moment, if you ask me today, like it's really these cold chain corridors which we need to qualify, but which is still limited availability, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of cold corridors is that they're sort of at their infancy. They're still early stage at this stage. Is it mainly a European, US at the moment where people are looking to implement them, or are we further ahead on cold corridors, and are you currently using them? Where are we at on them, do you think?
Yeah, for us speaking, of course, other destinations are from a volume perspective maybe not too interesting, right? So it's more that it's really interesting outbound Europe to US, because there's a big volume, and I think this is for a lot of other pharma companies the same as well. And there we look at the whole chain, but there's still some things which are critical, right? Because if a cold chain, for me, if it's a cold corridor, is like not necessarily I need an active container for what? Because it's a cold corridor. It should not use it because that's what it, from my understanding, is designed for. I should not being able to, or should be able to use also other types of packaging. And but still you have some long gaps in these cold corridors, which is of course tarmac time, loading, and then the engines in aircraft might be switched off till they have the certain heights. So that takes maybe 2-3 hours then from outside the cold area to actually engine is switching on again, maybe a bit longer even. It matters how long the loading takes at the specific airport. And then you still, of course, need to look very carefully at what type of packaging do I use and what is the lane profile. So I'm talking about winter, okay, it might work from Europe to US quite well. If I talk about summer, we also have hot summers, and tarmac is usually then even hotter than outside temperatures. So that might be then critical. So the selection there is I think the need to learn a bit more, but we could definitely then come back to simulations, what we talked about, which is a nice feature. You could simulate all that and test like worst case scenarios, what could happen, and then against packaging types, if you really can downgrade to a blanket, or you still require PCM material, which doesn't necessarily needs to be a passive packaging equipment. It could also be a PCM blanket, for example, which is also now available. So
and from your perspective, what would be the ideal end result for a cold corridor as a customer? If a big Ford is listening to this, what do you want from a cold corridor? What are the benefits? Is it price? Is it speed? Is it the quality that you're going to get out of that in terms of zero excursions?
Yeah, it's definitely the case. Zero excursions, quality, compliance, integrity of the product. So we need to find a way to limit these times where we are outside the cold area, right? Because that's still, I think, a weak point somehow in the whole process, where you can see, okay, that might be too long for some climate conditions we're at. So today it works, but in 6 months, maybe not. But I think there we need to be better, because if we then say, okay, we switch from active, we go to a passive material. Okay, the impact to use passive versus for example, RAP container, you can fit 4 or 5 pallets depending on the size in. It might then again be limited, the financial impact. So I'd say, okay, why do we even the switch? So I can stay as is, and it's much more secure. But the benefit would actually be to say, no, you can switch to maybe not simple travel blankets. It's 2 to 8. You need to be realistic. But it's like PCM material is in a good stage already where it's not so expensive. It's much more expensive than a blanket, of course, but still much cheaper than a full passive packaging. So we need to come down with the hours, right, when it's outside these cold areas.
Yeah, I agree. We're working on a project with one of the big forwarders in Europe, actually in Germany, and about cold corridors, and they're talking on their specification around 30 minutes as being the tarmac time that they sort of guaranteeing through the corridor. So there's obviously there's packaging needed there, but it's vastly reduced from what's normally required. But you're right, then it's just weighing up what's the cost benefit to what they're going to charge the cold corridor versus putting a much more robust packaging on and absorbing that cost. So I think there's a few issues to wrestle with, isn't there, before it becomes more of a mainstay maybe.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the same when we switch to ocean, right? Say, okay, you need to gain some experience, you will have some failures, but then you adjust the process and it will work fine in a year from now, maybe, if we start now, right, with those kind of qualifications as well. But it's, of course, always the question on do I want to risk my commercial product, or I set up a full qualification with dummy pallets, dummy material to qualify that. But it's actually interesting what you said. Then if they guarantee certain times, it's really good. Which when it's then really limited to half an hour or maybe even an hour, it should be perfectly fine with certain packaging. Right?
It's around that hour, over an hour in the sun, you've got a problem, I think. I think it's on a tarmac at 40 degrees, and it's going to get to 40 degrees, and we both know that if it's a 35-degree ambient temperature, the direct sunlight's 60. It's not 40. So it's what you're dealing with is so extreme at that point. You can't factor for over an hour because it puts so much stress on the pallet. So it does come down to the forwarder getting the product through very, very quickly and efficiently. Interesting. If we just look at sort of safety, and I just want to touch on this quickly as well. In your opinion, which safety or quality risk in cold chain is underreported and needs more attention?
I think this switch of transport modes is sometimes, or to rely on lane risk assessments is something where I see people rely on too much. So it's a lane risk assessment. It's like a paper-based assessment, right? Which is purely theoretical. So it's nothing to do with a qualification or nothing to do with also simulations or chamber tests, whatever you do. Actually, if we if I've been asked also from other companies or approached, as they know, we ship a lot on ocean. We have the experience there. I want to switch from active air to ocean, which is active, right? So our forwarder is telling us we don't need we need blankets, but we don't see that because it's active, right? So hold on. Okay. Based on the lane risk assessment shows it might work, but then, yeah, I think that's actually something you need to be aware of, that active is not active. Transport modes require different requirements and require to have a solid look at really the details. You need to focus on the details here in that aspect and become an expert in the whole qualification exercise. Other than that, it will not work. And I think that's the awareness. That's why we also had this discussion or this demo also at Logipharma, where we showed it to the people what we did to share it. It's not a secret, right? We shared it, and also the forwarder shared their insights, etc. So that's something that people need to look at, need to watch out for.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. Sharing is the key to the whole thing. Collaborating in terms of best practices is certainly the way forward. If we just move to sort of future outlooks and moving ahead, which technology or capability will widely be adopted in the next 3 years, do you think, to deliver the biggest practical benefit to cold chain operations? Where do you think we're headed?
I think the simulations, right? The simulations on qualification, because I think it's a bit outdated to do like qualifications, really have a paper qualification assessment and qualification protocol, which is then written between quality and logistics, and then to test it over 2 years, and then we are able to qualify it because we did it in winter, summer. Now we will for sure go into simulation platforms. We will for sure have more AI-driven simulation tools which can flag issues we need to look at, but also things we can ignore. Because if we have like these real-time devices, a lot of companies are using, right? We do as well. So of course, then you see every peak, everything is flagged. Maybe not necessarily that we need to look at it, but looking at it too manually. I think there we have strong platforms already on the market, which will evolve in the next years to actually take this over. So going away from a manual process to look at risks for certain shipments. If you have a global supply chain, you have thousands of shipments, so you cannot look at it, right? So that's a human can look at it and say, oh, there we might have an issue, and this is something we can't ignore because we know this trend and how it works during the journey. So I think this is one thing, and the other thing is like what I said, the qualification exercises will no longer be done in real life, because also I think I talking a lot to regulatory affairs teams, right, and also regulatory authorities are more and more accepting those procedures and those ways in order to qualify it, which is interesting as well, because they are the decision maker. If it's in a biologic license agreement in a BLA, you need to have like a qualification and need to show sort of supply chain and logistics, and often it's based on a qualification. But what they now look at, okay, you have experience, can you show for other products your experience in a certain temperature regime? They don't not necessarily look at the product itself. They just look at, oh, you have so many experience in 2 to 8. Show me that one, or show me a simulation based on your experience, because the data needs to come from something. It's okay for us. We approve it. So that's actually a good trend as well, to see that we no longer need to wait for years. Maybe it doesn't take always 2 years, but even if it's half a year, it's like a long time, right, to qualify something like that, and very cost intensive, by the way, as well. So it's not really efficient.
Yeah, and so I presume for someone in your position, getting a really good viewpoint of the historical data, and then are using things like AI now in your teams to sort of analyze the historical data and look at future outlooks and how you can sort of work your lane risk, because I presume the amount of information you're getting now is increased massively over the last couple of years, but also how you can analyze that information really well using AI models or whatever else. Has that been helpful, or is it still sort of slightly using the old methods?
Slightly using the old method still, but I think it's more about what we look at, right? Because I said in the beginning as well, I'm looking also at innovations, what's out there, what's new, can be adapted. So of course there are business cases on the table to review those things as well, right? To go in such a direction, but so far, I know a couple of companies, pharma companies, implemented those kind of tools already, which is interesting to see that, if they share, of course. At least they share the experience, right? Not necessarily to show me all the data, but like to share the experience on that and how it developed. And I think that's something everyone will go to sooner or later. Some are sooner, some are later adapter. But in that case, we're definitely looking at these things as well.
Yeah. No, great. Okay. Well, look, I know we're sort of pretty much out of time here. You're going to be at Logipharma this year. Are you running a session? And which day is it? When can people come and watch?
Oh wow, I need to check that. Is it the Wednesday? It has been moved. It was the first day. Now it's the second day. The second day, I think, is the Wednesday, right?
The most important day, Fabian. That's what they put you in the middle of the agenda.
Yeah.
What are you talking about there? And just give us a bit of an overview of the session so people know.
Yeah, it's a panel on actually the switch from air to ocean with some other pharma companies. So a bit what we talked about, but maybe a bit more operational. And it's going to be interesting. So happy to meet all of the listeners here who is interested.
Yeah, great. I think it will be a good session. As you said, it was always very popular before, so hopefully it will be again. That's good. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on. It's a brilliant discussion, really interesting topic. I think the whole air to ocean piece is, as you say, really important for everyone. So thank you for sharing all your knowledge there.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure. So you've been listening to Cold Chain Insights. My name's Thomas Hunt. Thank you for listening, and please tune in next week for our next episode. Thank you.